Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Money Talks. This is our chance to talk about everything going on in macro, crypto, world events. This week, I'm super excited to get into all things mining, crypto events with Nic Carter. Nic's a partner at Castle Island Ventures and a co-founder of Coinmetrics. Natalie Brunell, the newest member of the Abra family, is going to join us to discuss the latest Bitcoin news and analysis. We'll get into what's making headlines in the world. I'll dive into what's going on in the crypto markets, and I'll take your questions a bit later in the AMA. And as we start the show, please don't put your wallet ID in the chat. So I see most of you are cooperating. That's great. No giveaways this week. So let's get into it. We've got our guest on, our illustrious guest, Nic Carter. Nic graduated from the University of St. Andrews, went on to get his master's degree from the University of Edinburgh Business School. His first job in finance was for Fidelity, and he served as their first ever investment research analyst for crypto. In 2017, he co-founded Coinmetrics. I'm sure most or all of you have used Coinmetrics at some point. It's an open source crypto asset analytics platform for investors. Nic is a founding partner at Castle Island Ventures, a Boston-based VC firm. We'll get into that. I'm not sure anybody's Boston-based anymore, but in theory, a Boston-based VC firm that just raised $250 million for a new crypto fund, targeting startups, obviously in crypto, financial services, Web3, et cetera, et cetera. We'll obviously get into that. Nic is a frequent columnist for CoinDesk, and he hosts a pretty cool podcast, On the Brink. I've listened to it on many of my hikes with his co-host, Matt Walsh. All right, welcome, Nic, to Money Talks.
Thanks, Bill. I'm bashful and embarrassed at that effusive introduction, but yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. So, you're a super popular guy these days. Congrats on the new funds. Tell us all about it.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited. New fund raised 250. Continue doing our seed stage equity deals. A lot of it is crypto financial infrastructure, broadening our focus also to quote unquote Web3. A lot of people took umbrage at us saying that we would be doing Web3. I think Web3 is a useful shorthand for tools that allow individuals to interact with internet services in a way that's not highly extractive or exclusionary or risky, that allows them to retain more discretion over their data and their identities online. That's what Web3 means to me. And in conjunction with the raise, we also promoted Principal Ria Batoria to general partner. So there's four of us now.
All right.
4 GPs, and Ria obviously was at Fidelity Digital Assets. She was the head of research there and head of research at Circle before. Great CV, and we really, really, really like her, and we're betting on her. And so those are the headlines. Yeah.
Cool. And what about, where does Bitcoin fit in the overall fund model versus, what you might be doing with other kind of layer one protocols or Web3, whatnot?
Yeah. So I'm a Bitcoiner through and through, and it's always like a tough tightrope to walk, because as a venture capitalist, you have to look at the market, take it as it is, and you can't be too prescriptive about the market. So in our case, we listen to founders, and we invest in the founders, whether, regardless of where they're building, frankly, we don't prescribe a certain L1 or particular blockchain for them, or, cross-chain as the case may be. We just look for exceptional founders that are building, very strong businesses that are thesis aligned with us. And, some percentage of the time, those are Bitcoin only businesses.
Yes.
So we're investors in Casa, we're investors in River Financial.
Yep.
We're investors are in our more recent fund, we're investors in Bitcoin only businesses, Hoseki and Mash, or some newer names. And we're certainly going to continue to do that. I think that's part of my sort of role and obligation and what I'd like to do. All of that said, a lot of our startups are pretty blockchain agnostic, or they straddle dozens of blockchains, like Coinmetrics, right? Coinmetrics runs nodes for dozens and dozens and dozens of blockchains. Is there anything morally wrong with that? I don't think so, And so clearly I'm more of a moderate here, or a pluralist, but I don't apologize for that.
Yep.
I think a lot of these business models, whether it's, you're, kind of a crypto bank or a financial institution or a brokerage, necessarily entail you straddling many blockchains. That doesn't
Yep.
mean you're endorsing the other ones. And so, ultimately, our business involves us listening to the founders first, and we take what the market gives us. And so, some percentage of the time that's Bitcoin, but we're certainly not exclusively Bitcoin. And to be realistic, I don't think that you could deploy the amount of capital we're deploying into Bitcoin only startups and continue to be selective about it. I just don't think there's that much quantity. A lot of Bitcoin development happens at the institutional level, at the level of large financial institutions.
Yep.
We're active there. Not a week goes by almost without me giving a talk at some large asset manager making the case for them, or other financial organization, whatever. So it's not like we're not working on behalf of Bitcoin. It's just there's, by the numbers, not that many early stage startups building on Bitcoin.
Yeah, we get it. We have a small early stage token fund, and obviously it's token fund, so it's clearly not Bitcoin, but outside of the Bitcoin holdings we have directly. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. I want to get into the latest before we get into mining. So Canada, right? So obviously, what's going on in Canada. Recap for those watching who don't know, living in a bubble or under a rock. So Canada has basically passed these, or not passed, there's no law. It's basically enacted these draconian measures that effectively allow the government to order banks to effectively seize funds for any transactions related to this, specifically to this trucking protest convoy going on, but more broadly, it can be interpreted in any number of ways. And apparently, I don't know if you saw this, but some of the funds, or some of the Bitcoin-based funds, were frozen last night. Did you see this?
I don't know how effective that was, but yeah, I saw that some of the addresses were sanctioned, put on a blacklist.
Yeah.
I mean, can you realistically freeze them? Maybe you can threaten the people.
I see. So when you say put on a blacklist, it's more like an OFAC list where any exchange or anybody else seeing funds coming in either has to reject or potentially freeze the funds.
And yeah, there was an order, an injunction, I believe, that the Canadian government filed maybe today, about 12 hours ago, naming the individuals that were coordinating the crowdfunding, naming a bunch of service providers, and all of the Canadian exchanges, things like that, and also listing a bunch of wallet addresses. And so I think in practice, because the founder or the folks running the crowdfunding in Bitcoin were known individuals, it's not difficult for the Canadian government to sort of harass them legally. Right. But nobody knew up front that the Canadian government would respond in such an insanely draconian manner. So
for sure,
it's not like I would have, if it had been me, I wouldn't have taken steps to protect my identity, because I figured coordinating money being sent to truckers engaged in demonstration is not, a terrorist act.
Free country. I'm protesting. I'm exercising my democratic right to have my voice heard in a peaceful manner. I'm trying to put myself in the other person's shoes to say, what is it that they really think that they're accomplishing by instituting, again, I'll use the word draconian measures here that don't really resonate with many people. I find it hard to believe that even there's on the ultra far left a lot of people who are like, yeah, screw them, take the money, take their dogs, whatever
Right.
it is they're doing now. I mean, where do you come out on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because where we are in sort of political discourses is the exercise of government power is always good if it's in support of your side, and it's always bad if it's in support of the other side, right? But for people that are more foresighted about this, including on the left, I think you'd be extremely perturbed by effectively ex post facto criminalizing donations to particular political cause,
Yeah.
right? So during the violence in 2020, there were a lot of bail funds raised, right? Like people would donate through GoFundMe and other platforms to assist individuals that were arrested and to bail them out. That wasn't an uncommon thing to do. If you were to imagine, I think you always have to imagine that the political valence is flipped, right? And so what if a hard right party came into power in Canada and it's like, okay, crowdfunding to help bail funds, that's now illegal, and it's also illegal in ex post facto ways, and like you didn't know it was illegal at the time, and now we're making it retroactively illegal, which I think in the US would be unconstitutional, but I guess maybe it's not the case in Canada.
It's not that they're saying it's illegal. It's more like it's an emergency order, because you can't basically by decree in US or Canada, to my understanding, say something is illegal. You can enforce existing law or have an emergency decree that says we're suspending your rights, which is, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not using the legal terms, but it's bizarre. It's bizarre in a whole new way that I've certainly never experienced here in the US for sure, firsthand. And I'm not the youngest guy on the call. And so I suspect most Canadians haven't either. I don't know how this ends, but unless this gets unwound, it can get a lot worse, right? I mean,
and the precedent here is abominable. I mean, engaging in asset seizures and immobilizations, not only for what are effectively peaceful protesters, but also people financially supporting them.
Yeah.
I mean, that is Banana Republic type stuff, right? Like that's something I expect in Zimbabwe or Venezuela. That's not something I expect in like a country that's the top of the Heritage Foundation sort of political freedom list, right? So the fact that the Canadian government opted for this extremely harsh measure, I think shows a lot of weakness on their part. And I think it's going to alienate a lot of moderates too, even if you're against truckers. And like, look, the opinions are divided on the merit of the truckers, whether it's a good idea or not. I'm sure if they were parked in front of my apartment, I would be upset by it. Right. But, the precedent being set here is terrifying. Using finance, like treating regular Canadians like they're some sort of hostile foreign regime, and imposing broad-based sanctions on them. It's just everything we've been saying about state power and finance is just crystallized in this moment.
Yeah. I don't know how it ends, but I seriously hope that this just gets rolled back and that they take a deep look at what they've done and figure out a way to make sure that it doesn't happen again, or that it can happen again, most importantly. And I think about our current administration, and we have this new executive order coming down the pipe in the next week or two. Now, originally, I was led to believe that the executive order would partially be about some type of committee that would be put together to investigate what's going on over 12 to 18 months. But now I'm hearing rumors that there will actually be very specific orders within the executive order beyond, meaning regulatory orders. I find that hard to believe, but that's what I heard this morning. I don't know if you've heard anything different. The
rumors I heard about the EO were that it would be about asking for more time to study and investigate these markets. Given that the administration stance, and I've had direct contact with members of the administration on, Bitcoin topics, so I can tell you the stance is not a friendly one. Given that their stance is generally hostile, it wouldn't surprise me if it was something much more challenging.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if we experience financial repression or anything like what's happening in Canada, not that I expect that, it validates the case for Bitcoin, absolutely, right? So it's a lose-lose situation if you're the government and you're imposing some sort of monetary repression or signaling to the world that you're terrified of a non-state monetary good.
I saw a tweet from I don't know if you know Jason Calacanis, probably do because he's an investor as well, but hosts the All In podcast, and he basically tweeted what a bunch of Bitcoiners have been tweeting. He's not a Bitcoiner. even though he's a small
Not
investor.
at all. Yeah.
And his comment was, "This is the best. Canada is the best marketing Bitcoin's ever had." And obviously, we all think that, right? In at least in some meme-ish kind of way. But for him to say it, and a lot of people that I see outside of the space saying it, really hits home. You know what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. And the amount of moderates I've seen radicalized by this is inordinate. You just have to look around. And the fact that financial repression and effectively civil asset forfeiture on a mass scale, probabilistic civil asset forfeiture, deputizing all financial infrastructure for political purposes is happening in the West, in a country which is presumed to be a pretty taciturn country with ostensibly good governance. Yep. That is radicalizing, maybe not radicalizing, but making them realize we're not immune. We are not immune.
Yep. So, all right. I could talk about Canada and free speech all day. And I'm guessing you could too, but we have some important topics to discuss. So I want to get into mining a little bit. You published a presentation. It might even be November now. I might have I don't know my timing wrong. Correct me. But it was basically a very long PowerPoint deck. I heard your explanation of a lot of it on Palm's podcast, which was excellent. One of my very many long hikes listening to you guys. And can you basically okay, there's so much here. I don't even know where to start. But at the highest level, the narrative of basically Bitcoin mining is absolutely horrible for the environment, consumes insane amounts of electricity. Got a lot of people listening here who are hardcore into crypto, would love the talking points to basically educate their friends on why this is wrong.
Yeah.
What's the 30-second response, and then we can go deeper.
I think I need 3 hours, honestly. You're referring to the Texas Energy Summit presentation, I presume.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, I used to be a bit of a skeptic around this idea that Bitcoin is good for renewables, Bitcoin mining. I actually didn't believe it because renewables, they don't produce energy all the time, especially wind and solar. They're active at a capacity factor of 30, maybe 40% if you're lucky for wind. Solar is a bit less. And because you have to run your miners all the time, presumably, as a profit maximizing entity, running your miners just on a portfolio of these renewables, maybe doesn't make that much sense. So I was actually persuaded by that. I didn't believe that Bitcoin miners were particularly good for renewables, aside from hydro or nuclear. Now, a few things changed my mind. And the first thing was I realized that there were innovative business models where miners, and they're actually doing this, they're co-locating with your stranded renewable providers like wind and solar. They're eating up excess energy that the grid can't accommodate. And one thing I learned was that we're producing huge amounts of excess energy, in particular in places like West Texas, where there's an overbuild of renewables. And by locating there, they're the buyer of the last resort for that renewable installation. They're rescuing the economics of that, and they're making it profitable to build even more renewables. That I changed my mind on because I actually talked to a number of miners that are doing exactly that, including some of the largest energy firms in the world. So it's not just a Bitcoin miner story, it's an energy firm story as well. And you're going to start to see press releases. ConocoPhillips came out with one recently. But so that is something that I realized is actually true, and it's happening. Miners rescuing stranded, renewable economics, and then they are doing what's called grid firming much of the time, which means when those renewables aren't producing, then they pull in energy from the grid.
Yeah.
And so, it's not 100% pure renewable, but it's pretty good. Yeah. The second thing I found out, and this was a huge revelation for me, is miners are a highly benevolent load type on the grid. So even when they're on the grid itself, they're very suitable for increasingly renewable grids. So they can turn themselves off and on at short notice. They can dial themselves up and down, fractionalize their consumption in a way that virtually no other industry can do. So they are location agnostic, which means they can operate anywhere that there's energy. and they're interruptible, which means they can turn themselves off at the flip of a switch. Virtually nothing else can do this. An aluminum smelting plant can't do it. A paper and pulp mill can't do it. A steel plant can't do it. Hospital can't do it, because a data center, like a regular old data center, can't do it because they have service level, they have SLAs. They have to stay online. They need their 5 nines of uptime.
But let's put the clean energy piece aside for a second, right? I mean, by and large, energy producers aren't storing energy. They're producing energy in real time.
Yeah, you have to match the supply and demand absolutely in real time.
And so I'm not an energy expert. I understand basic physics. I took electricity and magnetism in college. I understand the basics. I understand how it works. If you're not storing electricity, effectively, it's gone.
You're dumping it.
Right. And so what percent, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I would assume a significant, if not a majority of the electricity produced at any given moment in this country goes unutilized.
Yeah. In fact, a majority of all energy generated does not make it to your wall outlet. It's lost in transmission, or it's lost at the point of generation.
So this idea that more electricity is being produced because of Bitcoin mining, on the surface, even before I read your stuff, seemed ridiculous to me. And by the way, China, before they banned this, my understanding is a lot of the pools were paying off the government to access hydroelectric power stations that were actually completely unutilized because they were overbuilding cities.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you can look at some of the data here. Yunnan and Sichuan province were curtailing on the order of 100 terawatt hours a year of hydro. So they just didn't have the transmission to move that energy long distance, right? Because those are remote areas. So that's just the reality of the energy grid, is like it doesn't travel well, and that's why you have these hot spots of energy, cheap, underutilized energy. You have to build very expensive high voltage transmission if you want it to travel well. Absent that, these stranded pockets can be exploited by Bitcoin miners. And, most people's mental model of energy is that if I'm consuming energy here, I'm depriving you of your energy there, which is just not the way it works. So once you get past that stage and you get into, the way that the grid actually works, it's a much better story. And so it's just a matter of educating people about how the grids work, really.
Yeah. But now, given that, even with the current downturn, we're still at 40,000 Bitcoin. It's very profitable to mine Bitcoin at these levels.
Correct. Yeah. With your newest hardware and decently priced electricity, you're still mining significantly below market price.
Yeah. And as a result, I'm seeing every day I'm either receiving an investment opportunity to come into some new mining pool, some new scheme, some new group in another country, whether it's in Eastern Europe or Middle East, whatever, or in the U.S., Texas, Wyoming, Georgia. Now I read Georgia's trying to also put tax incentive in place, and apparently it's working, because I've already seen the first couple of investment opportunities for Georgia. Where does this end? Where is this headed, in your opinion?
So mining will be fully integrated with the energy sector. And so already a lot of Bitcoin mining companies are service providers for energy firms, whether that's oil and gas, and the miners are engaging in flare gas miner, whether that's solar and wind, and the miners are rescuing stranded assets that exist, or they're waiting for interconnection. Yeah. Or there's a wind farm next door, which means that when the wind blows, it's a correlated output. And so my wind, I can only sell it at 2 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Or whether it's actually inducing the construction of new renewables. All these things are happening. Yeah. And it's a massive benefit to energy companies that for the first time have an uncorrelated secondary buyer, which is so useful for them.
But you're saying that effectively the monetary system it becomes, in a way, managed by the energy industry via the financial incentives that align all of us.
That's going to happen, yeah. And it's very, I don't think that's cause for concern, because these pockets of stranded energy are so distributed globally, right? That it's going to be a pretty distributed model ultimately, right? It's not like this one big wind farm in Oklahoma, and that's where all the wind comes from. Turns out the sun and the wind hit the earth pretty evenly, and there's a lot of stranded hydro, floating around. So, but yeah, what we will see, fast forward 5 years from now, every energy super major will have mining as a part of its business model. Most likely, the margins for mining will be pretty thin. They'll look like energy utility margins.
Yep.
And your average Bitcoin will be mined with two or less cent kilowatt hour energy, so very, very cheap energy, and it'll all happen in pretty remote areas away from population centers. And what's more, every miner will be engaging in these grid stabilization programs like demand response, whereby they selectively curtail their usage at a time of stress, that's actually already the case, but it'll probably become baked into your standard energy contract that they have to do that because miners are so suitable for that.
Yeah.
And so ultimately it'll become something that is a benevolent presence on the grid, consumes mostly renewable, and doesn't pressure energy prices anywhere, and most likely actually drives them down for regular households because it makes the grid more functional overall.
Yeah. So let's play this out, right? So 20 years from now, we've gone through, 5 more, 6 more, or 5.5 more halving cycles. And obviously the amount of Bitcoin rewards that you're getting in Bitcoin terms per block is very, very small compared to where we are now or where Bitcoin started. And so given the investments we're talking about, given the distribution across the entire energy grid that you're implying, either Bitcoin is worth $10 million per coin, or the transaction fees are massive, or some combination of the two, right? I mean, otherwise, this is kind of a 10 to 15 year phenomenon that may have to go away if what I'm saying isn't true.
All three options are possible. I don't think it is a requirement the Bitcoin security spend, aka fees plus subsidy, remains structurally elevated forever. From the perspective of someone building out an energy infrastructure with which to mine Bitcoin, there are other opportunities in terms of monetizing that energy. Bitcoin is, I've talked to all of them. Bitcoin is currently the number one largest opportunity by a lot if you have spare energy. However, there's other things you can do. Generic computation will most likely become, with GPUs or, other similar hardware, that will become a major story here. As right now the world spends like 6% of its GDP on data centers. That'll probably increase to 50% in a couple decades. There's no reason why our demand for computation would decline. It will only increase. So generic computation will just become more popular. Hydrogen production, hydrogen electrolysis, that's considered a key part of the green energy transition. That will be a very big feature of these grids. Desalination, things like that, fertilizer production. There's other things you can do with energy that is kind of stranded, where you've built the infrastructure to actually utilize it. For now, Bitcoin is the number one thing. But if you're a Bitcoin miner, you might be thinking, okay, well, do I want to diversify a little bit in case, Bitcoin transaction fees never increase or whatever, it doesn't pan out. Now, that's not what I expect, but it's just to say there's like other positive externalities that come from building out these data centers in the middle of nowhere in West Texas or whatever. There's a lot of other things you can do there. So it's not like, it's not the case that this effort will all be wasted necessarily.
Yeah. Awesome. So what about nuclear? Do you have any theories on where nuclear is going to fit in the future?
I mean, I think Bitcoin is very well suited for nuclear. We've already seen some nuclear providers. I think there's one called Okla, which have signed LOIs with Bitcoin miners saying, when we spin up our new facility, we'll be able to monetize maybe at night by selling it to Bitcoin instead of selling it to the grid, right? And so having that uncorrelated buyer that's buying energy, profitably whenever you want, wherever you want, that makes any new energy asset construction more economically worthwhile. Mm-hmm. So nuclear is no exception there. And nuclear provides steady baseload, which is great. Yep. So you're going to see these models that involve toggling the energy dissemination to the grid and then to Bitcoin and then to the grid, and creating a portfolio of buyers that maximizes your outcome. It's like an, portfolio optimization problem, except with buyers of energy. So that will definitely be the case. Now, the question is, will popular attitudes shift sufficiently in the US such that building nuclear becomes viable again? Right now, nuclear is expensive on a levelized basis, not because anything is expensive about nuclear, but because there's enormous regulatory burdens and enormous barriers. Like, there's a nuclear permissioning agency in this country, and I think they haven't permitted a single nuclear plant in their entire existence.
Yeah.
So that's why nuclear is expensive. It's not because nuclear is hard. I mean, we know how to do nuclear. We've been doing it safely for like 70 years now. But so I think it just depends on whether popular attitudes change. And I think that's one of the worst things environmentalists ever did, was discourage nuclear. That was one of the worst possible things they could have done for the planet.
Yeah. I mean, if you actually look at deaths per kilowatt hour, which is one of the most interesting charts I've ever seen. This a few years ago, I think Gates Foundation or somebody. I was at a TED event and I got into heated debates with progressives, wealthy progressives who just didn't get it. But some of them are waking up now.
Now they are, and it's encouraging to see environmentalists coming around on nuclear, because there's a big difference between like, I feel, that it's unsafe and it offends me from an ecological perspective to create nuclear waste or whatever. And then between the actual issue, which is carbon intensity of generation. Like, that's the issue. Eyes on the prize here, guys. When it comes to that issue, nuclear is your number one best performant choice. By far. And I watch what happened in Germany, and I'm just, as somebody who lived there for a long time, I'm just, yeah. It was obscene. It's all emotions. There's no logic in this. And now they're buying Russian gas, right? They have to import Russian gas, and their solar and wind is not sufficient. And after Fukushima, they turned off 7 power plants in Germany, I think, nuclear. And it's not like the Fukushima earthquake tsunami could have happened in Germany. And also, those were built to a fail-safe standard that was superior to the Japanese ones. So even if there had been an earthquake and somehow a tsunami in Germany, their reactors would not have failed. So it was a purely emotional decision. Yeah. Okay. So let's switch gears. So last question. You have your eyes on a lot going on in the space. Give me 2 things going on in the crypto world that you're just crazy excited about right now, that either everybody's talking about or maybe nobody's talking about. Well, I think the integration between Bitcoin miners and the energy sector is undercovered, and the implications of that are not fully appreciated. I think it's a massive de-risking event for Bitcoin mining as an industry, because now we have the largest energy firms on the planet, including renewable energy firms that only do renewables, that are now in support of Bitcoin. They're lobbying. That defangs what has been the number one critique of Bitcoin to date, historically. Second of all, I think, consumer use cases for Lightning are actually really exploding. And that's been really slept on. Cash App just rolled out Lightning this week. Works very well. It's very impressive. I think that if you look at the numbers, there's, applications with meaningful volumes. And I think the outcome of that is it really changes the game in terms of how content is monetized on the internet, and it creates new business models for creators. And you don't have to monetize with ads or subscriptions or affiliate links anymore. You'll be able to monetize directly. So that's going to make a whole new class of content actually available that economically couldn't exist before. That is very exciting to me. And I know it's taken a while for Lightning to reach maturity, so to speak. It's been about 5 years, but it's impressive. And I haven't always been a Lightning bull, but seeing the actual consumer use cases here is really compelling. Yeah, I'm in a similar camp. I was a little skeptical that the economic incentives would be there to run nodes, but you can't deny the surge in usage. Oh, and now it's from obviously a very low base, but you can't deny the surge in usage over the last 18 months. And obviously, Jack's going to do whatever he can to make this a reality, even if he has to, pay for it himself or subsidize it himself.
for a while, and he's got a lot of resources to do that. So he's effectively a large bank now. So yeah, I think what I'm actually interested in Lightning is to see how traditional FIs figure out financial models to create nodes for P2P, for integrating with card networks, and whether or not it really can be useful when integrated with kind of layer 3 stuff like cash outs at Western Unions and stuff where there's a floor in price today that Lightning doesn't solve. Because if you got to go from a stored value to cash, there's a fee for that Lightning can't fix. But if we can integrate with those layer 3s and eliminate the existing middlemen, then I think we're really onto something. But we'll see. I think the key is again the financial incentives.
The other thing I've been monitoring is the insertion of stable coins onto Lightning. And I think some Bitcoiners might chafe at that because they want Bitcoin to only have native tokens, aka Bitcoin itself, on Bitcoin. But the notion of the UI of streaming payments plus doing it in a stablecoin format, it's undeniable that stablecoins are the preferred medium of exchange in the crypto industry. $150 billion.
If you're using a Bitcoin wallet, I mean, it really wouldn't, right? I mean, you have to have a new wallet specifically for USDC that ran Lightning, right?
You'd need new wallet assumptions, new designs. Yeah, the wallet developers would have to bake this into the software for sure. But
is anyone doing that?
I have heard whispers. I believe it's possible to have tokens on Lightning. If you're able to fractionalize USDC, like, to me, that's powerful because in our current regime, like, you do have to track your basis and, like, in theory, pay taxes on, minuscule transactions if it's in Bitcoin terms and there's a capital gain. If you do it in dollar terms, you avoid that. Now, that's not pure from a Bitcoin perspective, but, I'm more of a realist. And so, I think stablecoins are pretty great as well. And so I'm excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, I think I also think that this issue of minuscule capital gains will go away eventually.
They will have to.
Something like less than a couple $100 a year doesn't need to be reported, which is still too small relative to things like money transfer and Western Union usage, even for migrants. But I'm guessing a lot of them aren't reporting income anyway. Super interesting. So Nic, 2 questions. One, where can people find that report that you mentioned? It's been a few weeks since I read it. And 2, what's the best way for people to follow you and keep up with all this amazing stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, so I archive all of my content at my personal website, niccarter.info. And I think that particular presentation you can find at .info/talks. And so it'll be there, and you'll see that I did 4 or 5 talks on Bitcoin mining last year. So maybe I can take a break this year, hopefully. And then follow me. Twitter's got to be the #1 place. I don't know if I'd recommend it. I've been told I'm very annoying on there. So,
it's fun.
Exercise your own judgment.
We're allowed to have a little fun while we're getting our opinions out there too. So it's all good. If Elon can have fun, so can we.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Nic, I think you're awesome. Based upon the comments I'm getting here, I'm looking at the comments in real time from our Facebook stream, our YouTube stream, our Twitter stream. People are digging this. Even LinkedIn, I've gotten on the stream there. So a lot of interesting comments. Go check them out and maybe respond. A lot of people really resonating, by the way, with the nuclear comments. So that was interesting, which I guess I would expect here. But thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And what we'd love to do is in a few months have you back on and get the latest on what you're seeing, and also hear about the newest investments from the fund as well. Happy to, and thank you, Bill. And hopefully by then I'll have a nicer looking living room. So we'll see if we can set that up. Yeah, well, otherwise you can join me here on the moon. It's all good. All right, brother. Good to see you. All right, take care. All right, you too. Bye-bye. All right, thanks, Nic. That was awesome. All right. So what do you think of that? Let me know. We put a lot of work into this. We've got some other really cool guests coming up. Just a few comments on this whole kind of proof of work thing. I'm seeing a lot of questions about why do we need proof of work? Why does proof of work really matter? proof of work, which is the basis for processing Bitcoin transactions and mining new Bitcoin, has actually been around much longer than Bitcoin itself, right? It's proof of work is basically a system that takes computing power and energy and uses it to deter frivolous or malicious use of computing resources, right? So people had proposed this idea of using proof of work to deal with spam emails and preventing denial of service attacks on websites, 20 plus years ago. In 2004, Hal Finney, who was the person who processed the first receipt of a Bitcoin transaction online, adapted the idea to secure digital money, calling his unique version reusable proof of work. When Bitcoin was created, it simply borrowed Finney's idea to allow secure, decentralized consensus for transactions, preventing the same Bitcoin from being spent twice. So it was this idea of proof of work that allowed Bitcoin to solve the double spend problem. So how does proof of work work? In a nutshell, and then I'll move on, but basically in a nutshell, proof of work is a mechanism that requires members of a blockchain network to make an electronic effort of some kind. In the case of Bitcoin, they're solving an arbitrary numerical puzzle to validate and secure Bitcoin's peer-to-peer transactions, which are just a bunch of transactions taken from a memory pool of unprocessed transactions, usually based upon how much fees someone is willing to pay the person doing the proof of work puzzle in the first place. So to understand this, you have to understand this idea of hashing. Hashing is an algorithm that converts a key or a very long string of numbers into much shorter code. It's one way, which means that hashing can create a code from a key, but a key cannot determine that code. And so the same key will always generate the same hash. So for Bitcoin, new blocks are added to the chain by creating a valid hash that matches one on the last block added to the blockchain. And the computer that made the new hash, I can't speak today, the computer that made this new hash will receive the Bitcoin as a reward, right? So again, you hear me constantly talk about financial incentives. I talked about it in the context of mining. I talked about it in the context of nodes and users, et cetera, et cetera. So high-speed computers compete to be the first to generate this valid hash by randomly generating new hashes until the right one is found. When a computer finds a solution, it's broadcast, kind of like in a BitTorrent model. It's broadcast to the other machines on the network, and then consensus, which is what Bitcoin ultimately is about, is achieved when the majority of nodes agree that one miner has solved the problem. And this happens incredibly quickly, and the process repeats every 10 minutes, which is what you know as a new block. Okay, all right. So as you can tell, there's a lot of competition to be the first to discover, the solution to this correct hash or solve the puzzle every 10 minutes, which is why there's so much competition in Bitcoin mining. And you hear about this hash rate going up every year and how much power Bitcoin consumes. Again, while it's estimated that Bitcoin is using over dozens and dozens of terawatt hours every year, which is maybe more than a country, most of this electricity is getting lost at the edge of the network. So it's a total fallacy that Bitcoin mining is actually causing or increasing global warming. Right? I'm not aware of any new kind of electricity power stations being created explicitly because of Bitcoin. I've never heard of one. And if somebody knows of one, please correct me in the show notes, but I've never heard of that. As we said, as Nick and I discussed, the vast majority of generated electricity today simply goes away. Poof, gone. Right? Anyway, so so we'll have a lot more to say on this. We're going to talk about competing technologies like proof of stake. We'll get into that another day. So that's my take on proof of work. Thanks again Nick, we're way behind today, so we're going to get up real quick with Natalie and get into her update and market analysis, and then I'll get into my overview on what I'm seeing with the price. A lot of you have questions about what's going on with Bitcoin, Ethereum, CPRX. But first, our goal is to make Abra the safest and by far simplest to use crypto platform in the world. We've put a lot of work into creating a simple and easy experience for you. Here's a look at how easy it is to make trades in the Abra app.
Trading on Abra is easy. Just click the exchange button. Tap the source you'd like to trade. Tap on what you'd like to trade it for. Type in the amount. Then click trade. Tap, type, trade. Totally easy on Abra.
All right, welcome back. Let's get right into what's going on with Bitcoin. Natalie Brunell joins us for an analysis. Hey, Natalie, how you doing?
Hi, Bill. Good. How are you?
Great. What's going on? Tell us.
Okay. There's so much going on this week, so I'm going to go over a lot of headlines. We had Ukraine legalizing Bitcoin for trading and regulation. We have Canada blocking access to bank accounts for people who donated Bitcoin to truckers. The FBI formed a national cryptocurrency unit. BlockFi was fined $100 million, and Biden is set to introduce his crypto executive order next week. So lots to cover. I'll start with President Biden since that's forward-looking. He is expected to issue an executive order next week directing agencies across the government to study both cryptocurrencies and, you probably guessed it, a central bank digital currency. And they're hoping to come up with a government-wide strategy to regulate digital assets. Now, I want to mention that after the 2008 financial crisis, there was actually an agency created called the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and that's tasked with monitoring risks to the financial system. So the White House is actually asking that group to study financial stability issues that arise from digital assets and the systemic risks that they see potentially with stable coins, which some politicians obviously view as threatening the US dollar. So the executive order offers the White House, the Treasury, and other members of the government the opportunity to weigh in on the digital dollar. And via the order, the SEC, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and other agencies, they're all going to look at measures that the government says are intended to protect consumers, investors, and businesses as the cryptocurrency space grows. So the government will also look at coordinating with other countries to standardize rules for crypto around the world. As you know, you may be following the IMF and other central banks around the world have been critical of El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin. And actually this week as well, I will mention there was a bipartisan group of senators that introduced legislation in the US to mitigate the perceived risks by El Salvador's legalization of Bitcoin as tender, saying that that poses risks to the US financial system. With things like money laundering and terrorism, to which President Bukele, of course, responded. He called the politicians boomers and said that El Salvador is not a U.S. colony. So all of this news comes on the heels of also the FBI announcing the launch of a new unit dedicated to providing analysis and training in crypto matters across the Bureau. It will now have a, quote, virtual asset exploitation unit that's going to bring together investigators with expertise in analyzing blockchains and seizing virtual assets. Now, during the announcement, officials said that there's been a rise in illicit use of digital assets by criminals who exploit them for extortion schemes or cyber attacks and laundering. But I want to fact check that because the US dollar is used far more for nefarious activities and for fraud than things like Bitcoin. And of course, the Bitcoin network has never been hacked in its 13-year existence. And I want to add to that, criminal activity related to crypto has actually been decreasing, according to reports I found. It's at about 0.15% of total transactions, not 15%, 0.15%. And then I also want to mention Ukrainian legislators voting to legalize Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies Thursday. Until now, they've been sort of in a regulatory gray zone, but now it will make it easier for consumers to invest in the space. So the Ukraine parliament passed the law of Ukraine on virtual assets that happened yesterday. It passed overwhelmingly. And Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation tweeted that the move will reduce corruption risks and prevent fraud in the exchange of digital currencies. Now, the Ukraine bill was actually the second legalization attempt in less than 6 months. If you followed news of Ukraine and Bitcoin last fall, there was actually a bill calling for the creation of a new independent regulatory body to oversee crypto exchanges, but that was vetoed by Ukraine's president. Now, this isn't the same as legalizing Bitcoin as tender, the way El Salvador did. Legal tender refers to money like banknotes that, when legalized, must be accepted when offered in payment of a debt. This legalization means Bitcoin will essentially be regulated, and facilitate easier transactions. Let's also talk about developments in Canada. So many Bitcoiners following this. Personally, this has been infuriating to watch. I'm someone who comes from a communist country, so I couldn't believe some of the videos coming out of a democratic nation in the year 2022. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland said this week that the names of individuals and entities, as well as crypto wallets, have been shared by the RCMP. That's my fire alarm. Well, we might be pausing this a little bit.
I don't think they like you talking about Canada.
Yeah, it looks like Canada might be watching this.
Okay.
Bill, I'm going to send this back to you for a bit.
All right. We'll see if it ends. We'll come back. But
right.
Good luck. If you have to get out, please get out safely. So, all right. So hopefully everything's okay with Natalie, and we'll cut that a little short today. Love her updates, and hopefully she's safe. If you have to get out of the building, Natalie, please get out.
Well, I think we're good. I think it stopped. So
okay, we're back.
I'm gonna go ahead and pick up where I left off.
Yeah,
okay.
Please go ahead. And if you do have to get out, don't worry about us. Just get out.
Yeah, this is live television for you, right? So, okay. So Deputy Prime Minister, you guys might have seen this video. It went viral. She said this week that the names of individuals and entities and crypto wallets have been shared by the RCMP. That's the Royal Canada Mounted Police. They've been shared with financial institutions, and accounts have been frozen, and they say more accounts will be frozen. They say that 34 crypto wallets were linked to funding the truckers. According to CoinDesk, that includes 29 Bitcoin addresses, and then addresses for other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, Cardano, Monero, Litecoin. And certainly there are more addresses being investigated, because the most recent Bitcoin fundraiser on Tallycoin raised about 22 coins worth over $1 million Canadian dollars. Now, this, in my opinion, is the weaponization of banks against Canada's population. It essentially means you don't own the dollars in your bank account. You pretty much rent them, and someone can shut off access at any time, which should worry a lot of people. And the only world leader we've seen actually condemning the actions in Canada is President Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. He tweeted a response to the original video of the Deputy Prime Minister addressing the Emergencies Act. He said, quote, "Are these the people who give lessons to other countries about democracy and freedom? This is one of the top ranking countries in the, quote, democracy index. Your credibility on these topics is now worth 0. And finally, I do want to mention the SEC has charged BlockFi for failing to register the offers and sales of its retail crypto lending products. So what does that mean? They're essentially getting a big slap on the wrist because the SEC says BlockFi's interest earning crypto accounts are securities. Now, this is a first of its kind action. The company agreed to pay $100 million. They will pay $50 million to the SEC and $50 million to settle fines in different states. And they've not admitted to any wrongdoing, but BlockFi said that it will stop selling its interest earning accounts, which paid nearly 10% APY on crypto deposits. If you are a BlockFi customer, your assets are safe. You will continue to earn interest, but existing customers won't be able to put more money on the platform, and the company can't accept new US customers for now. But they are working on creating a new SEC-approved product called a BlockFi Yield. And when that's done, customers will migrate to that, and that will offer interest-bearing accounts for crypto assets. So the SEC is really set on tackling these going forward. So it does raise questions about some of the other companies in the space. And that's really the latest with Bitcoin this week. Bill?
All right. Well, it looks like the alarm cooperated there at the end. They didn't mind you talking about BlockFi fines, but they don't like you talking about Canada. So it is so infuriating what's going on there. I don't know if you saw Nick and I talking about it earlier, and you know, everyone we know. And what's most fascinating to me about it, well, besides the fact that, you know, this kind of dystopian bullshit is how many people who aren't into Bitcoin actually commented that, wow, this is amazing marketing for Bitcoin. People who didn't get it, like Jason Calacanis, who, you know, is not a Bitcoin fan, public or crypto fan publicly, thinks that there's a lot of it's a scam, literally came out and said, you know, on his All-In podcast, hey, this is the biggest marketing ploy for Bitcoin that I've ever seen.
Yeah. I agree. I think I tweeted that this is like basically a commercial on loop for Bitcoin that's broadcasting around the world, courtesy of the Canadian government. And I'm sure you saw the charts that showed sort of the bank run that happened, people just running to pull out their money from traditional bank accounts. And so, yeah, what better value proposition for Bitcoin because they can't touch it.
I happen to be in Athens. I don't remember when this happened, when people were afraid with what was going on with the euro in Cyprus, when Germany bailed them out in the very early days of Bitcoin. And it was the first time that anyone had associated Bitcoin with that. And only people who were hardcore into it paid attention. But now everyone is paying attention. I don't know if everyone Trudeau is not paying attention. He doesn't really care. But pretty much everyone who is not a politician is paying attention.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope that this will lead more people to just at least examine Bitcoin and start educating themselves because, it is really scary to see a government official come out and say that we're now going to cut off access to the money that you earned, that you put in there for safekeeping, and we just have access to it. We can just call up the bank and tell them you can't access it. That's really, really scary, especially in a democratic nation.
Yeah. I just had a really interesting question here in the live chat. Somebody said you were just, I think you either are or you just were in El Salvador. What do you see from the locals? Not the Bitcoin folks, not the people who support us as crypto Bitcoin centric folks, but from the locals on the ground. Do they support Bukele and this effort around crypto, Bitcoin in general, or support? First of all, do they support him? And second, do they support this effort?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm so glad you asked this question. Yes, I just got back late last night from El Salvador. I was there all week documenting sort of the Bitcoin adoption and what people think on the ground. And it was fascinating. Overwhelmingly, every single person that I asked was very pro Bitcoin and pro Bukele. There were a couple people that are skeptical of Bitcoin being just a digital form of money because they don't understand it. So they were candid. They said, I want to learn more. I don't fully trust it. Some of them had some issues with the Chivo wallet, but for the most part, everyone was really excited about it, especially in Bitcoin Beach. So there's that area in El Zonte. It's famous now, Bitcoin Beach around the world. And literally Bitcoin is boring to them now because it's just a part of their lives. It's really integrated in their local economy and they accept it as payment as they would anything else. Now, the one thing I will note is what was interesting is a lot of them are not using this as a savings technology yet. They're literally transacting in it daily for their everyday needs, and they're not accumulating it to save the way most people are here in the US, right? Most people in the US who are hodlers, they don't want to get rid of their Bitcoin because they believe it's going to go up in value. But I think there needs to be more education on the ground in El Salvador because many of the people, especially maybe older members of the population there, they just view it as another form of currency that they're able to accept. And, I think that there needs to be more work done to let them know that, hey, they should also be putting some of this away and keeping it as opposed to just spending it and trading it back from US dollars, back and forth. And that I have not seen yet. And so when I spoke to this place called Hope House to a group of women just about opportunities in the space and about Bitcoin and their backgrounds. And that's one thing that they were surprised about. They didn't realize that one of the kind of inherent principles of Bitcoin is being able to save for the future and accumulate it as opposed to just spend it every single day.
Interesting. And on Bukele himself, I mean, is it all positive, or do you get a lot of people who are just like, he's a dictator in sheep's clothing? I mean, honestly, what do you hear?
Yeah. So every single day, I asked this question to everybody that I met, and I heard nothing negative about Bukele. So we went through San Salvador as well as El Zonte, and I talked to business owners, I talked to hotel owners, restaurant workers, and not one of them had anything negative to say about Bukele, both on or off camera.
Very interesting. All right. Well, I'm going to make it down there at some point. Abra's expanding in the region. We're working on El Salvador, going in Peru and other countries. So I'm definitely going to make it there firsthand and experience it myself. I know we've got folks from our partner teams watching right now. And so I'm super excited about the work they're doing behind the scenes. But and as always, thank you for the super enlightening and interesting updates, and welcome back.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I do want to mention, because I got this question so much online, it was very, very safe. I had so many messages asking me, do you have a bodyguard? And I've never felt more safe. The people were all super, super friendly. And, they are what the feeling that I took away the most is that El Salvadorans now have hope. They feel like instead of dreaming of coming to the US, they actually want to stay, or their relatives want to come back because there's so much opportunity that's being created, which is, I think, the main reason why they have something positive to say about Bukele is they see that Bitcoin, among other things, is bringing a sense of opportunity and more jobs to the country. And so now they feel like they can remain or even come back, as opposed to wanting to come to the US, which was pretty much the pattern and sort of the dream before.
Amazing. I mean, look, as somebody who used to work in remittances, we always said that the single best way to not have money flowing cross-border like this is to create the opportunities at home in the first place. And anything, I think, we're building a Bitcoin crypto ecosystem is one, and mining is one of the smartest things that any country can do right now to create entrepreneurial opportunities. And I think it's, in that regard, it's awesome. Personally, I still have some concerns about Bukele. We'll see. But I'm encouraged by the locals' opinions matter way more than mine, obviously, infinitely more, actually. So I'm encouraged by that. And thank you so much for your efforts. Super interesting.
Thanks so much. See you next week.
All right. Have a great weekend. Take care. All right. So we are way behind today. Hopefully it's worth it for all of you. And you've been enjoying Money Talks. So all right, so I'm going to do, for those of you who want to stick around, I'm going to do just a 5-minute update on what's going on and some important things that I'm seeing on the macro side. And anyway, so as you know, keeping your hodlings in Abra keeps them safe. And if you use Abra Earn, can make them grow. Abra Earn pays you interest on the funds you keep with us. We're super happy and excited that our partnership with Prime Trust has been growing. Hopefully, you've all been reaping those rewards. Anyway, here's how to earn with Abra. All right, welcome back. So I had a long macro update planned. It's we're going on 62 minutes, so we're not going to be able to do the long macro update or AMA today. Let's just go to the charts really quick, and I'll give you just a couple of snippets on what I'm seeing. Next week, I'm going to lead with some macro updates, and I want to some things I want to say that are really important. But look, the bottom line is we're going sideways, right? So this is the chart from basically April through February. And as you can see, we're touching the May 19th price again for the 10th time, and sideways and with no clear direction. Now, given a choice between going sideways at 40,000, going sideways at 20,000, I obviously pick 40,000. I'd prefer going sideways at 60,000, but it is what it is. So the bottom line is that we are in an accumulation phase where we've seen a lot of movement to strong hands, but we have not seen any meaningful retail buying in the Bitcoin, Ethereum markets for the last few weeks. And that's the reality. We call it like it is on Money Talks. So my take is that at some point, we are going to see retail buying coming back into the space. I don't know if it's going to be a news-driven catalyst. I do have a theory, and I agree with a report that I read this morning on this, that says when we see these downturns, we do see short-term correlation with the stock markets that usually lasts for about 60 to 75 days. We're at the tail end of that 60 to 75 days right now. So if I go, let me see if I can do this quickly here. I'll bring up the this S&P 500 chart. on the daily. So you can see, we're going sideways now here as well with a downturn from the December highs. That also seems to correlate with, what we're seeing somewhat with Bitcoin movement. Now, small movements down in the S&P at these kind of in these kind of down markets correlate with much larger movements with Bitcoin and vice versa. So my prediction is that the correlation will end in the next couple of weeks. I think that the potential kind of things to negate that would be us actually dealing with a Russian invasion. Don't see that happening. I really don't see Russia fully invading Ukraine. I could be wrong. Things getting, out of hand with some type of Biden executive order. Again, I don't see that happening. But these are black swan events that, we can't control, and they could create a much deeper pullback. But right now, my working theory is that these correlation periods, historically, if I look back, have lasted anywhere from 1 to 2.5 months. Somebody I wrote that they calculated 70 days. It sounds about right to me. Anyway, we're going to dig into that next week a little bit more. Right now, I would invite you to obviously look at your own timeline and time horizon and do what's right for you. I'm into crypto for the next 10 years at least, if not longer. And so my time horizon is commensurate with my risk profile in terms of my overall crypto allocation, which is very high for me, right? And that may not work for you. I'm comfortable with that risk. I'm probably in terms of crypto a little bit more Ethereum than Bitcoin right now. And I'm, look, obviously Ethereum's pulling back even more than Bitcoin, but you can see the movements are correlated, right? Ethereum moves are more volatile than Bitcoin. Bitcoin moves are more volatile than the S&P. Okay, so I want to lead with this next week with this macro thesis discussion. I want to talk to you about. I saw a fantastic. I'll stop the screen share. Actually, I saw a fantastic report from Fidelity that I want to talk to you about, and then also a really interesting report from Pantera. I'll link to them before the show, but next week. But we'll lead with that, because I think it's really important for us to keep in mind, as when you're moving sideways in a sine wave, obviously the most fear happens at the bottom, and the least fear happens at the top. And if it keeps happening, you're just going to have these peaks and valleys of fear and greed over and over again. And I think that it really is important in those cycles to think about the macro picture. But also, I think that we're about to enter a period where bond markets are going to fall off a cliff and interest rates are going to go through the roof. And if that happens, the question becomes, what does it do for Bitcoin? And can Bitcoin truly, and crypto markets truly, become and stay uncorrelated to interest rates? And what's the big trade? Meaning, where do I put my money when bond markets fall off a cliff? So we're going to talk about that in next week's show. It's going to be our #1 topic, and I'm really excited about it. Since we didn't get to it today, I'm going to do a much deeper dive even, so hopefully you'll benefit from that. I asked a question in the chat earlier, my team did for me, whether we should do a separate show on CPRX. I get so many questions on CPRX. So we're going to do a separate AMA, either Twitter Spaces or Clubhouse or YouTube or something, maybe even Telegram. I don't know. We'll figure out a tech way to do an audio AMA on CPRX, maybe with some charts or whatnot. And we'll get back to you on that. Okay. So I am seeing some initial whales who were doing tons of trading to earn CPRX, selling some of that CPRX. The good news there is it's going to distribute CPRX into a lot more users' hands. And that's what we want. And with some of the plans that we have for using CPRX and some of the products we're coming out, I'm pretty excited about it. So I'm certainly not selling. I've been buying. So anyway, we will get the Abra team on, and we'll get somebody from the Crypto Banking Alliance on, and we'll have a long chat about it. It'll be fun. All right. So we're at 70 minutes. Thank you for sticking with us today on the long show. Thanks to Nick. Thanks to Natalie. Thanks to the awesome Abra team that puts in all the work behind the scenes. Chester's comment, fiat is going to zero, can't argue with that. In the meantime, have a fantastic weekend. Let's hope that things settle down in Canada, things settle down in Russia, Ukraine, and that we live in a more sane world by this time next week. In the meantime, stay safe, and we'll see you next week on Money Talks. Peace, everyone.